I was born in Hill City, Kansas, July 23, 1897, and was given the name of Victor Everett Smith. My dad was born in Canada, and my mother was born in Des Moines, Iowa. Mother was the youngest of her family. There were 9 brothers. She was raised on a cattle ranch, and when she was old enough to ride, she rode the range with her dad and brothers. As far back as I can remember, we lived in Hill City. Our home was built of a white sandstone blocks on the edge of a large gully. Close to our home there was an ice house down deep in the ground, and in the winter they would cut ice on the river and store it in there, putting straw in between and on top. There was a Negro who worked there to help put the ice in storage, and a kid like I was playing down in the ice house watching them. He told me to get out and I did not move fast enough, so he threw the ice hooks at me, striking me in the head, so then I went home all covered with blood. We had a lot of storms in Kansas with large hailstones. There were shutters on all of the windows, and if we did not get them shut quick enough we had to hold our hands on the windows so they would not break. One summer we had a bad dust storm and a prairie fire that was real bad. You could hardly see. All of the people in town hitched up their horses to wagons and hauled the people down to the river for protection. I was very small when this took place, but I can remember the wind so strong that I could not walk without some help. This must have been about 1899 or 1900. The folks was running a restaurant and bakery, and with all of the doors and windows shut tight, there was so much dirt in the place they had to quit business so as to clean up. Dad was not a very large man, about 145 pounds, and was rather a heavy drinker, and when drinking he was mean and would fight like a wild cat, which was done very often, and was as strong as a bull. I remember one time when he and a couple of men was at home and drinking. Something went and a fight started. Dad was after one man running through the house. Mother and another man tried to hold Dad, and he pulled both Mother and one man through the door trying to stop him. Finally, Mother got tired of Dad's drinking and the dust storms in Kansas and decided to take off. At this time I was sick in bed with pneumonia, and the doctors told Mother that if she did not get me out of Kansas that I would not live, so she rolled me up in a blanket, and her and my brother Les, 1 year and 10 months older than me, and took off for Denver, Colorado. I don't know how long we were in Denver, and some time later we left for Greeley, Colorado. Mother had a brother living there that was Uncle Hub. He had a large sheep ranch, and we stayed there for a few weeks. I don't know for how long, but it seemed quite long. We were also at Fort Collins for a while. Then we took the train to go to Bellingham, Washington. Mother had 2 brothers there. Traveling was very slow in those days. We spent many days and nights on the train. The coaches were the old open-end cars. We finally reached a place, and I think it was Portland, and Mother told us that we were going to cross a river. It was at night and we could not see anything. The cars were run onto a ferry or on barges, and we were taken across the river. We then got on our way to Bellingham. Mother had 2 brothers living there. One was a coal miner that was Uncle Fett. We stayed with him for quite a while. Mother was looking for a job, then later we went to stay with the other brother. His name was June and he was a section foreman on a railroad. After staying there for a short time, we then went back to Uncle Fett's. June lived a short way out of town, and by staying with Uncle Fett, Mother had a better chance to find a job. She finally got a job as a waitress, and Les and I stayed with her brother. After a while, we moved to a different part of town, then something had to be done with us kids. By this time Les was in school. Now here is where I have lost track of some of the things that happened. Mother had decided that we would have to be farmed out. Somehow she found a place for Les on a farm where he could go to school and do chores on the farm for part of his board. That was on Orcas Island, which was across the bay from Bellingham. I stayed with Mother in a rooming house for a short time. I don't know for how long, but she then got a job as second cook in a logging camp. A man and his wife were the head cooks, and their daughter, who I think must have been in her 20s, waited on tables. Besides cooking, Mother was to help her. There were 200 loggers in this camp, and in the cook house there was only 2 beds. One was for the man and his wife, and the other was for mother and their daughters. I had to sleep in the middle with mother and the daughter and my head down at the foot of the bed. I don't know how long this job lasted, but it seemed quite long. We were now on the move again back to Bellingham. We never stayed in one place long enough for me to start to school. Mother went to work as a waitress again, and I stayed in the rooming house while mother worked. After a while mother met a man by the name of Miller that she fell for. He was a bartender. It was not very long and they got married and rented a house. Mother then quit work for a while and I had a chance to start to school. It seems to me this marriage did not last very long and they separated. We stayed in that house and mother went to work in a fish cannery. I tried to do some of the housework and go to school. I would do the dishes and sweep the floor. On Saturdays, I would put the throw rugs on the line and beat the dust out of them. Sometimes I would go down to the cannery and watch them bring in salmon. The piles were very large, they unloaded them from barges. They would then fork them into a trough of running water with a line of Chinamen on each side, using large knives to clean the fish. They would then cart them over to the women to pack. Mother was a salmon packer. I would stay there until she was through working, then we would go home. Mother was very hot-headed and if everything was not right, I would get the strap. This job either run out or mother quit. I do not know which. She then decided that she was going to farm me out and she found a place on a small farm over at Linden, Washington. I was then farmed out. I do not remember my age, but by this time I must have been around 6 or 7. I was supposed to do chores to help pay for my room and board. I was supposed to go to school, but I never saw the inside of one. I lived there for a few months, then mother came and got me and we were on the move again. This time out in the timber to a shingle mill. Mother was cooking for 42 men at this camp. My job was to take care of the dining room and wait on tables, also help with the dishes. Every day all of the lamps had to be filled and cleaned. These all hung up on the wall. The tables had to be washed and the floors swept. Mother taught me to bake the cakes, so then that was also my job. We made large sheet cakes and would cut them into squares. I would have 1/2 hour in the afternoon that I did not have to work. The hours were long, up at 4:30 in the morning and to bed about 9:30 at night if the work was done. If not, I stayed until it was done. The men at this camp gave me the name of Skeeters because I was so little and skinny. There was a man in this camp by the name of Smale that was an engineer at the mill. He got stuck on mother and wanted to get married. So they both quit their jobs and one night in the early hours of the morning we was on the move again. We walked on the railroad track a very long distance to the depot so as to catch a train back to Bellingham. After arriving in Bellingham, mother got married again. We then rented a house and Smale went to work in a lumber mill and I had a chance to start to school again. Now, they sent me back to the first grade because I had been out of school so long. Les is back with us again and has started to school. We stayed in Bellingham for a while and life was somewhat better. We spent some time at the beach, digging clams and getting crabs, then we moved again to a small town by the name of Ferndale. We lived on the bank of the Nooksack River, and again I was set back 1 grade in school. Smale worked in a mill across the river from where we lived and would row a boat across to work. The folks then went into the chicken business for eggs and meat. This little river was great fishing in those days. Mother made me a line of black and white silk thread. It was braided and this was where I caught my first fish. A nice 16-inch trout. Les was fixing a place to set my pole and I was throwing my hook in and jerking it out when the trout took it. I spent many a day on the bank of the river fishing. I don't remember how long we lived here, then mother and Smale got on the move again, back to Bellingham for a short time. We were there for a while then on a boat headed for Seattle, Washington. Smale had gotten a job there. Here in Seattle, we lived in an apartment house at 10th and Jefferson, then later moved into a house on the corner of 12th and Yesler Way across from the ballpark. I wanted to get in and see the ball games but had no money, so I got the idea of going under the fence. After we had lived for a while, I dug a hole and would crawl under to get in. This did not last very long. The hole was found and was blocked up. I then found out that I could get in with some of the ballplayers if I carried their bat and glove for them. In those days they all had their own bats. I would then meet them when the players got off of the cable cars and ask them to let me carry their bats in, that way I got into the ball game. Later on I got a job selling peanuts and popcorn at the ball games. Then when the season was over, I sold newspapers on the street corners during the winter. Then in 1909, Smale got a job as steam fitter for the Standard Oil Company in Portland. We then left Seattle and came to Portland. He had found a house to rent out on Portsmouth Avenue, down next to the river across from the oil company. We got into Portland late at night and walked from the depot over to Burnside to get the St. John's Street car. We lived in this place for about 6 months, then moved over on Union Avenue between Morris and Stanton Street. Here I got to start school again. I was set back again on account of moving from Washington to Oregon. I went to the Elliott School on Rodney and Knott Street. I met a boy by the name of Fred Starrett who lived close to us. He had a pair of roller skates and would let me use one of them, and that was the way I learned to skate. We then moved from the house on Union to one on the corner of Stanton and Union. Les got a job at the Five and Dime store, and I got a paper route delivering the Journal. I had 125 customers, and my wages was $6 a month. I then got enough money to buy my own skates. Out in the Irvington district, the streets were all paved with smooth black top, and that is where we would go to skate. There were only 2 homes out there, one on 15th and Stanton and one on 12th. All of the streets were cut throughout as far as 29th, and all of the ground was in fir timber. There was a racetrack on Grand Avenue between Fremont Street and Stanton, at where the Irving Park is now. Down at the foot of Russell Street there was a hotel and saloon. This place was used as the headquarters for a gang of shanghais. When the sailing ships came in, they were anchored out in the middle of the river until moved over to the dock to unload and load. Then when ready to leave, if they were short of crew members, they would get them from the Shanghai gang, and by the time they woke up they would be out to sea. In 1911 Mother and Smale were separated, and we moved over on Graham Street in a large house where Mother was going to take in boarders. At this time there was a strike on the OWR&N Railroad, and while we were getting ready to receive them, a man came to see Mother about rooms. She told him that we were not ready yet, but the next day a train came in from Chicago loaded with strike breakers, and here they come with 14 of them up to our place. Les and I were moved up in the attic from our room so as to make room for some of them. A lot of them doubled up, but we had one that wanted a room all to himself, a large Norwegian. So Mother gave him a front room so he would be by himself. His name was Johnson. With a gang of strike breakers like this, we had a lot of trouble. They began playing cards in their rooms, then gambling started. Mother issued orders that there was to be no gambling, but one day, it was getting very noisy upstairs. Mother went up and caught them at it again, and trouble started. A couple of the fellows began to get rough with Mother, and the large Norwegian man came in and took Mother's part, and then a fight started. Mother then threw the 2 men out that had that room. From then on we would see more of Johnson. He would come down to the kitchen and help us with the work. He got sweet on Mother and would take her out quite often. Mother then quit the boarding house business, and her and Johnson got married. We then moved from this large house to an apartment over on Morris Street. We were there only a few months when Johnson was transferred to Tekoa, Washington. This was in July 1911. Les got a place to live and stayed in Portland because he was making enough money to keep himself. We left for Tekoa July 21, 1911, and arrived the next day on the 22nd. I remember when going up the gorge, there were a lot of fish wheels on the rivers. Up around Rufus and Umatilla, the jackrabbits were so thick that there were hundreds of them running from the track when the train went by. Now back to Tekoa again. I was sure homesick for Portland. Not knowing anybody, I spent a lot of time alone. We lived across a creek and across from the depot. I spent many days just sitting on the bank of the creek, with no place to go and nothing to do. Tekoa was a tough railroad town with only about 1,100 people there with 7 saloons. During harvest time the population increased because a lot of harvest hands were in town. When it came time for me start to school, I not want to go because I knew that I would be set back again, and the folks were talking about going back to Portland. When we left Portland, I had just passed into the 5th grade. Finally the truant officer got after me, and I would always tell him that we were going to move back to Portland. It went on like this for a long time, and I never did get back in school. I then just spent my time drifting around. One afternoon I was sitting on the bank of the creek, daydreaming, when I heard some shooting. I run up on the bank and could see some people running up the street, so I went up to see what was wrong. I found out there had been 3 men shot in a saloon. The town marshal, a deputy sheriff from Colfax, Washington, and the bartender had done the shooting. There were 2 more men hit also, one lost a thumb, and the other had a crease across the forehead where the bullet hit. The night before in this same saloon there had been a harvest hand killed. He was drugged down by the railroad tracks to make it look like he had been hit by a train. We have now moved to another part of town and spent one winter in this house. In the next spring, the folks bought a house and decided to stay in Tekoa because Johnson had gotten a foreman job. This was on the R&N Railroad. I tried to find work, but in a small town there was no jobs to be had. They wanted men on the railroad. But I was not old enough. That winter I'd done nothing, but in the spring, Johnson lied about my age, and I went to work as an engine wiper on the night shift. The hours were from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., and the wages was $2 a day. I worked at this job for a few months, then was either laid off or quit. I don't remember. My next job was driving a delivery truck for a grocery store. This paid $6 a week. After about 3 months, I went to work as a clerk. This lasted about 5 or 6 months, and I got into a fight with one of the store owners. He called the town marshal and was going to have me arrested, so I quit and went to work the next day in a meat market. I was the back room man and made all of the hams and bacon. There was not enough money in this job, so I quit and went to work on a hay baler out in the harvest field. I had many different jobs. I worked in the woods, shocked grain, drove a team on the county roads, rode for a cattle buyer, and many more jobs before I went back to the railroad again on August 22, 1916 as a machinist helper. I worked as a helper until April 12, 1917. I was then set up to a machinist handyman, and I stayed on this job until I was transferred to Portland and went to work as a machinist apprentice on March 25, 1918. I finished my apprenticeship July 22, 1922, and went to work as a machinist. I met a girl by the name of Margaret Catherine Heim and was married July 23, 1925. We lived in an apartment house on Michigan Avenue and worked as a machinist until February 22, 1924, when I was sent to Walla Walla on a motor car that I had overhauled. I was on the road between Walla Walla and Yakima to qualifying engineers on the motor cars. I was there until May 15, 1924. The time that I was there I put 6 weeks of it in the hospital with pneumonia, and Margaret stayed in the boarding house. When I was well enough to travel, we came back to Portland on May 25, 1924. The following is a list of jobs that I was on in Albina. May 15, 1924 to December 16, 1927. Machinist at Albina. December 16, 1927 to February 14, 1928. Acting miscellaneous equipment foreman. February 14, 1928 to March 26, 1928. Machinist. December 28, 1928 to January 27, 1929. Acting miscellaneous equipment foreman. January 27, 1927 to November 22, 1932. Machinist. 11/22/1932 to March 1, 1933. Was laid off. March 1, 1933 to May 30, 1933. Was called back to work as machines. May 30, 1933 to November 1, 1933. Was laid off again. November 1, 1933 to November 18, 1934. Was called back to work as a machinist. November 18, 1934 to December 12, 1934. Was laid off again. December 12, 1934. Worked one day at Argo. December 22, 1934. Worked one day at Dorenbecher Furniture Factory. January 18, 1935 to August 14, 1940. Was called back and worked as a machinist. August 14, 1940 to November 1, 1940. Acting gang foreman, wheel gang and welders. November 1, 1940 to March 11, 1940. Machinist in air room. March 12, 1940 to April 12, 1941. Acting wheel gang foreman. April 12, 1941. Appointed gang foreman. October 1, 1941. Appointed assistant roundhouse foreman. March 20, 1942. Appointed engine house foreman. March 24, 1942 to April 3, 1942. Acting district foreman. April 4, 1042 to December 1, 1943. Engine house foreman. December 14, 1943 to June 7, 1945. Drop pit foreman. June 7, 1945 to August 6, 1945. District foreman. August 6, 1045 yo January 15, 1946. Engine house foreman. Jan 7, 1946. I resigned as roundhouse foreman and went back to work as a machinist. I got tired of the rat race of the foreman job. I was then offered the job as assistant master mechanic at Huntington, but I refused to go and bid on a job in the AC shop. I stayed there for a couple of years, then went to the air room and worked train control equipment. May 15 to 1950 to June 53 to 1950. Relieved George Johnson as air room foreman. I then bid on a welding job and stayed on that for about 1 year. Then from there I went back in the SIR room and stayed there until I retired July 1, 1963. Notes. I was elected in November 1934 as secretary of Armstrong Lodge 1333 with 410 members. Resigned that in 1942 to accept a permanent assignment as foreman. After I resigned as roundhouse foreman, I went back on the secretary job for about 2 or 3 years again. I was then elected as chairman of the machinist craft in 1950 and was on that for 3 years and resigned in 1953.